My name is Arun. I am an alumni from IIT Madras. So I have two or three comments. The first one was about the oral tradition. If you look at the Wikipedia webpage of Vedic chanting, I think UNESCO has assigned a status of probably, it is given a heritage status by the UNESCO. So I think even if the Westerners, academicians, they attack the Vedic chanting, even the UNESCO itself has given a heritage status. That is very important.
But let me tell you, this is an example of praising something. Westerners don't deny that it's great. The allegation is not that about whether it's beautiful and all that stuff. Chanting is done. But chanting can also be that it has really got no legitimacy as a process that claims to be a process that produces some effect. Vedic chanting is a chanting of Shruti that affects your consciousness. It produces a certain effect. I can appreciate it like the archaeologist appreciating the painting or something in a purely secular way. So the question is not whether they appreciate Vedic chanting, whether this word heritage includes the sacredness as a legitimacy of that tradition. That is a fine tuning you have to look at. Okay. Yeah, otherwise, you know, you're also just often our government, all the governments, they fall short of the sacredness of our claim. The yoga, when there was an International Yoga Day, the video or the description that was spread out unofficially, I don't know how many of you know this, did not have the sacredness. The link with, and it did not have Om. It did not have the Vedic link. People just went out angry. Yeah. In my e-group, people went out and said this is complete sellout. Well, our government doing it. It's better not to have a yoga day than to authorize, make it authoritative that this secularized yoga is the legitimate one. If the Indian government does it, then it will become the standard. And then there was a lot of back and forth. And then the government said, no, we are going to have Om. So, you know, it means that there's always this, we are always kind of at the edge of losing this sacredness. Even our own people find that it is baggage or it's some kind of embarrassment, but we have to be very clear about this. There is cognitive science where they're looking at chants, they're looking at the effect on the mind, they are looking at meditation. These are not just empirical studies in neuroscience, which are very positive, very interesting, but also theoretical models being built about consciousness. The Hindu meditators, Buddhist meditators are highly sought after in these kind of researches because that they are able to produce states of consciousness that neuroscience a few years ago didn't know were even possible. So the link of sacredness to higher states of consciousness and effects on disease, effects on all kinds of neurological conditions is becoming more and more studied. I would like our people to study it and constantly make sure in the papers they publish they give the Vedic references. And it should not be that subject 3, subject number 7 produced this and subject number 12 through 15 produced that, like they are some kind of anonymous people. Well, who are they? They are Vedic people. They're performing a particular kind of mantra. That ought to be mentioned. But often in the clinical studies that are being published, some of them getting huge recognition, the Vedic origins of this is not being mentioned. So yes, our meditation tradition is doing very well. UN will do this and some guys will get Nobel Prizes. But that does not bring credit back and link back to the Vedic tradition the way I would like it. So my requirement is much more serious and much more demanding than what these kind of recognitions are giving.
Just a comment on that. I think in July, in the Journal of Neurology, one paper was published which studied the brain structure of the people who have learned Vedic chanting, and they actually found that the brain structure of these people is different from what is the normal structure. So there is some upcoming evidence on that.
Yes.
Right. My second comment was on
the people who've done the maximum in this are Dalai Lama's people. Dalai Lama's people have worked a lot on establishing their style, and Maharishi's people have done a lot. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's people have done a lot of this kind of research, but what is happening is that their research is often being considered as biased, it's religion and whatnot.
No, they have used CAT scans to find the brain structure, actual structure. The physical, they find physical changes in the brain, which is much different. I mean, they find more white matter and grey matter. And
so some of these studies started in the 60s and 70s with Maharishi people, Maharishi University, and they started this whole research on the effects of meditation. The measurable physical, material, biological effects of meditation, without any doubt, they pioneered this whole area. And it was considered some kind of biased stuff.
Okay.
And a Harvard guy called Herb Benson. Herb Benson is a Harvard man. He's now in his 90s. He learned transcendental meditation, and he then took the same technique, developed his own look-alike, did not credit the Maharishi movement, and he called it the relaxation response. And he started teaching undergraduates the relaxation response, replicating all the studies that Maharishi was doing in his own way without mentioning anything about Vedic stuff, became very, very famous, and established all these studies as some kind of a secular meditation going on. Go ahead.
My second comment is about the Purva Paksha. Where should the actual seeds of Purva Paksha be sown? Because if you look at the history textbooks which are taught in the school, they are like totally watered down. And if you, in my opinion, the Sanatana Dharma till now has survived because it was practiced locally in individual houses. Actually, the temple was just a meeting place for all the people where, you know, as a group, the thing was.
So let me
going on.
answer your question. You
Yeah.
just tell me the question and I'll answer it.
Yeah.
So where should the seeds of Purva Paksha be sown? The seeds of Purva Paksha, I'm trying to gather good traditional scholars of Sanskrit and Sanskrit texts, in particular in Tamil Nadu and in Karnataka and wherever else I can find them. But I think there's a good chance that this should be the home base, and I would like to teach them, like the head of the school, the university this morning. She said that we don't know where to look for the problems and the issues. If you tell us where the problems are, what the issues are, we can give the response. So I have to do the Purva Paksha, and the traditional scholars have to give the Uttar. I have to say this is what the problems are which are being written. They have to give the responses. This is how I think the seeds have to be planted. I would like in the next year or so to have created a team of 5 to 10 traditional scholars who've done a good solid response to Western Indology on certain topics. And I need some funding for that, because these people, I don't need any for myself, but to hire these kind of people, give them some time, some travel and whatnot, it'll take some resources. Assuming we can get that, I think I've identified the talent. I've identified good scholars who are the kind we need. So if in a year we can prepare a home team of such scholars, then we'd like to challenge the opposing side to come and debate. And we'll have a team to debate. And that's how we start taking our tradition back. We need to take the tradition back into Swadeshi Indology. That's what I'd like to do.
But at a more fundamental level, shouldn't the textbooks also reflect this? I mean,
That's a different matter.
Yeah.
The Purva Paksha is at the knowledge production level.
Yeah.
Textbook is a part of the distribution of knowledge. So first there is a knowledge production. We have to become a knowledge producing.
Oh, you're saying the discourse has been totally taken over by them. So
That's
you
correct.
first have to get back what is ours, and then you can probably control the discourse. Is what you're saying?
We have to challenge the interpretation.
Yeah.
And then our interpretation can filter down to media, to textbooks, to whatnot. Because right now, you cannot change textbooks and media while the discourse at the higher academy level, at the academic level remains on the other side, because you cannot disconnect the discourse, the intellectual discourse, from its popular representation,
Okay.
from the popular distribution.